Hi, this is Robin Aber, and this is part two of my introduction to Photoshop. If you did not see part one, I introduced myself and said that I have a YouTube channel called @Photomaker Academy, and this is the full URL for that channel. And in that channel, I post educational videos. I call them workshops, video workshops, because they're not quickie little 5-minute things. They're really intended to be like classes for people who are serious about learning about photography. I'm particularly oriented to using Photoshop for fine art photography. So that is the focus of my channel and the educational videos that I post there. So if you're interested in seeing what kind of content there is with regard to how to use Photoshop, you can check that out. And if you are interested, you can subscribe on that channel. So under the videos, there is a subscribe button. And what that means is subscribing is free in YouTube, certainly on my channel. And all it means is that when I add new content to my channel 1 to 2 times per month, you'll get a single notification from YouTube just letting you know that there is new content available for you to check out if you want to. I don't do any marketing emails or any kind of emails. I don't sell mailing lists. I'm an amateur photographer, and I'm doing this as a volunteer type of an effort to help other people who are interested in doing photography and processing photos. So there is no charges or ongoing spam that you'd be getting if you do subscribe. So I just thought I would point that out in case you do want to find out some more and get some more lessons and education about Photoshop. And I'm going to take a quick drink of water because my throat is going here. Okay, so let me close this, and while we're talking here, in part one of my video, I gave an overview of the Photoshop interface and toured you around some of the different features and capabilities that are in Photoshop. I also discussed how to set up your preferences, at least some of the what I consider most necessary preferences to set up, and then I covered how to open, close, and save new documents. So I'm going to springboard from that at this point and move on to how to work with layers in Photoshop. So this is really an introduction to layers in Photoshop and working with layers. So I probably should explain first that what is a layer? In Photoshop, a layer are tiers of images. They could be text, they could be special effects, they could be things that you paint on. They basically let you add more content to your starting image or your starting blank canvas that you want to build upon. So for instance, right here on the right side of my Photoshop interface, we have 2 layers for this particular image. Okay. You can either, as I mentioned in the first video, start by opening a blank document, sort of like this one, and then build content on top of it. Or you can open a photo or an image of your own and then start layering on special effects or other features. So that's what a layer is in Photoshop. It's a stack of content that lets you add more features to the original base image. If you're old enough to remember, or if they still use overhead transparencies and overhead projectors, it's really the same kind of concept where if you put content on that transparency and you stack them up, you stack them one on top of the other, and the higher you go in the stack, whatever is on the top will hide what's below it, and wherever there is no content, it's transparent. Well, the same principles apply in Photoshop layers. You build from the bottom up, and the higher layer content will hide the lower layer content. What I highly suggest to people when they're working with Photoshop is put one thing per layer. Don't try to build everything and do everything on a single layer, because if something goes fluky and you want to undo something or change something or you want to eliminate something, it's too hard to do it if you've put everything on a single layer and then you have to start all over, and that could get frustrating. Whereas if you put all your individual content on its own layers, then you can modify that content individually. You can get rid of pieces of content that you decide, maybe that's not something I want after all. You can easily move things around if they're on their own layers. So I highly suggest just putting one piece of content on each layer. Okay, so one of the things that you do is, as I said, before we talk about other things you can do with the layers, let me build up a layer stack. So this new document here is going to be my base that I'm going to put other additional image content onto. So we have what is always a background layer in Photoshop. When you start out with a new layer, it's always labeled background. I highly recommend, again, another recommendation, that when you're working in Photoshop, whether you're starting with a blank layer like this or a blank canvas like this, or if you're starting with a photo of your own that you want to do some post-processing to, I say duplicate your background layer and make a copy of it. Don't work on your original just in case something happens that you don't want to hurt your original image. So we're over in our layer stack. We want to make a duplicate copy of the background layer to begin working on so we don't hurt the original. So it says it's the layers stack. We left click on this active layer, and you know it's active because it's highlighted blue. Left click and drag down to the bottom of the layers stack to the second icon from the right. It's a plus, a box with a plus inside, and drag down to on top of that and release. And that is the add new layer icon, the box with the plus. So now you can see we've got a new duplicate layer there. So we've got two layers in our layer stack right now. And the copied layer is active because it's got the highlighted blue on it. So let me just label this. To label a layer, so if you want to keep track of what you've done on each layer, so you don't get confused about where you did what in case you want to change something, you left double click on that text and then you write green or whatever yours is going to be. I'm going to write green layer, okay? And then just left click once there and we've got our layer labeled. Now, if I want to move additional images onto this blank canvas, we have to have our Move tool active. We go to our toolbar, and the top tool that looks like a cross right up there at the top, you can tell it's active because it's got the black behind it. That's the Move tool. So with that tool active, we'll left click on the image we want to move into the new layer stack and then just drag. So we'll click and drag into the layer. There we go. So now we've got, and you can see it doesn't eliminate it. You're not getting rid of it by doing that. It's just making a copy and dragging that over to your new location. So here we have a third layer, and this is, I'm going to double click on the text and call this Heads Quarter. Okay. Now, with our Move tool still active, we can click on this quarter and move it and reposition it anywhere we want on this layer. So that's partly why I like the idea of things on a single layer, because then you can put them whenever you want and you don't have to keep moving other things around at the same time. So we'll leave George right there. And what I want to show you is I'm going to turn off the visibility to the green layers, and I do that by left clicking and just turning off that little eyeball icon. And now you can see that that quarter is on a transparent layer. So all those little gray squares indicate that this is everything where there's no content. This is the content. This is transparent. So I said it's just like those overhead transparencies, because you can see anything that's below the transparent area, but this, because it's on top, is going to block anything below it. So now when I turn, because this is transparent, when I left click in here and turn back the eyeballs, you can see. Now you can see the green because it's visible and it's showing through the transparency on this layer. All right, let's move in this other content so we can see how to work with that. So again, make sure your move tool is active. You'll know it's active if it has that black highlighting behind the tool you're working with. Left click on the next image that you want to bring over, and then drag that over into your layer stack. Okay, so now we have our tails quarter, and that's again a new layer that we've created. So I'm going to left click on those words, and I'm going to type in tails quarter, and then just left click quickly. And again, just like this, you can move that content around anywhere you want. Now, what did I say? As we build up in the layer stack, whatever is higher will cover whatever is lower. So if I move this with my move tool active over here, I can hide this or partially hide it. Okay, so that's something you have to keep in mind with the principles of this, is that whatever is higher in the layers stack will hide whatever is lower in layer stack. Okay, so now with the move tool active, I'm going to move this folded dollar bill. So I left click on him and pull him over. Oops, didn't grab it. And pull him over. Okay, so you can already see the folded dollar bill, which I'm going to double click on the words and type folded. Let me get this out of the way so you can see. Folded dollar. And then single left click in there just to stop that. Again, can move it anywhere I want on the layer. Look, you can even, if you want to go for an effect where it's partially off the page, that's fine too. But again, because it's at the top of the layer stack, it's going to cover anything that is below it in the layer stack. And then let's just get this last dollar bill over here. So again, move tool, which is the cross looking icon at the top of the tools bar, is active. Going to left click on the flat dollar bill, and I'm going to drag that over into this new document. And again, you can see same principle. Because it's at the top of the layer stack, it's covering anything else that's below it. So I'll double click, oops, double click on the text and type flat dollar. Okay, there we go. Now, something to keep in mind, if you don't want to be bothered labeling all your different layers like this, when you're in the move tool, which is what we already have active, if you go to the options bar for the move tool, and I talked about the options bar in the first video, the part 1 of Introduction to Photoshop, and said that each of these tools has their own unique options bar. The options bar for the move tool has this word auto select, and I have the little box in front of it clicked to on. There's a check mark. If it's not clicked on, that will be an empty white box. I like to keep it clicked on because what it does is, with the move tool active, if I don't have these layers labeled and I click on one of these images that I've pulled in as a layer, look what it's done. It's identified that layer for me. So watch again. So this time I'm going to click on the folded dollar bill, and let's see if it goes to the layer with the folded there. Yeah. So that's a handy thing if you don't want to be bothered labeling your layers. I personally recommend it because I think it helps you keep things straight if you're working with multiple layers. But if you don't want to bother, have your move tool active, make sure you have auto select checked on, and then when you click on something, it will automatically take you to the layer and make that layer active. That does that. Okay, so again, we have all of our objects now, all of our images is the way to think about it, in this document. So we can move the layer content around. We've shown that. We can also change the layer order. So let's say I want this quarter to be on top of this flat dollar. So I will left click on that quarter, and you can see it's become active over here. And if I want it to be on top of the flat dollar, what does that mean? If I want it to be on top, well, that means it has to be atop of the layer stack, because everything on top hides the things below. So I left click on that quarter layer and keep it left clicked and just pull up to the top of the layer stack, and now it's on top of the flat dollar. And again, so now I can position it so that it's in front of the flat dollar. Same thing with the folded dollar. Let's say I would rather have that folded dollar in front of the flat dollar. So we left click to make that folded dollar layer active. There we go, it's the blue. And I want it on top of the flat dollar, but not on top of the tails. So I will left click on the active layer, the folded dollar, and keep that left click depressed and just pull it up to between the flat dollar and the tails quarter. There we go. So you just have to gradually pull it till you see it's in between, and the line in between will sort of light up a little bit, and then you'll be like a blue highlight there, and then you'll know you're there. So now we're where we wanted it to be. So we've got the flat dollar in front of the folded dollar. If we want to move the quarter, we can click on it and then move the quarter. If we want to move this flat dollar down, we can click on it and reposition it. Okay, and if we want to move this quarter, where's a good place to put him? Okay, so we can have him looking over there at his buddy over on the other side. There. Okay, so we have moved content into a layer stack. So this is considered a layer stack. Each successive layer is going to block the content below it where there is content, and where it is empty or transparent, you will see what is below. And if you want to reposition content on its own layer, you click on the object, have your move tool active, and just move it wherever you want to have it positioned. Okay, and if you decide that you want to change the positioning and have one item on top of another, like let's say this heads quarter, let's say I want them in front of the folded dollar. We left click and keep that left click pressed, and let's take him, slide it just up above the folded quarter. There we go. The folded dollar bill. Okay, so there you go. So you can reposition your content wherever you want doing that. Okay. All right, what haven't I shown you? If you decide you maybe don't want this because these things all look better together and this tails quarter somehow looks out of place, although we've got the heads and the heads and the tails here. But let's just say for argument's sake, you don't want to have that tails quarter showing. And you change your mind, and maybe you put something on your image and you don't want it there after all, then all you have to do is left click on this little eye icon that's on the same active layer, and it'll be hidden. So it's not deleted, it's still there. You would have to physically drag this to the trash can down at the bottom of the layers panel if you wanted to get rid of it. But if you want to look at this and say, is this better with 3 rather than 4 things, then you can temporarily turn off the eye, and if you want it back, you can just reactivate and left click again. So it's a toggle. Toggle the eye off, toggle the eye on for visibility on the layer. Now if you want to duplicate a layer, let's maybe click on George's head here. So let's say we like this shiny dollar and we want to do another one of him. So what we would do is with that layer active, we got that active, we left click and drag it all the way down to the bottom of this layers panel that we're in, to that same icon we used before. It's the second from the right, the square with the plus in it, to add a layer, and left click, and now we've got 2/4. Okay, so again, with the move tool active, we can reposition this wherever we want. Okay, what else haven't I showed you? We can add an empty layer. Okay, so let me go to the top of the layer stack, and if we just want to add an empty layer, so no images added to it, just the transparency, we come down to the bottom of our layers panel, to that same icon, the box with the plus in it, which is the add a new layer, and there, now we have an empty layer. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to type some words here. We can go to our toolbar, so on the empty layer, we come to our toolbar, click on the T, which is for type, and you'd come to the options bar for type, and you can see what the typefaces look like. And let me use this one. We've got it on the color is black. And let me type, this is money. Okay, and then same thing with the move tool active, we can move this around. Okay, so it works just like the other content. What else do I want to show you? I showed you naming, so I think those are some of the main things that I wanted to show you with regard to what a layer is, how a layer works, the philosophy of a stack of content that you can modify, the idea of transparency. So now let's talk just a little bit about modifying layer content. So we've already talked about it in the sense that we can move content around by making the layer active. Let's see something about transforming content now. So we're still on our This is Money layer. You can tell that because it's got the blue highlight. Now if we want to make this a little bit bigger, what we would do is go up to our Edit menu, which is right up at the top. So again, in part 1 I talked about the different menus in Photoshop, and we come to the Edit menu, and we'd come down, just scroll down, sort of mouse down or hover down to where it says Free Transform, and left click on that. So now we have a box around the text that says this is money, and there are all these little handles at the corner. So with those little handles, you would left click on the handle and just drag, and I'm dragging diagonally to make this bigger. And this is money. That's kind of fun. And then if I want to stretch it out, then you would use the handles in the middle. Now, with this free transform tool still active, you look and see how it's got that little curvy thing. If you go to outside, just outside those handles, you can angle this, okay? And then you can drag it down. This is money. Okay, so if with free transform you can scale up, you can, by having those little two-headed arrows just outside and pulling, you can rotate, you can distort by pulling on the center handles like that, and modify content that way. And I don't want, and again, because this is text and I want it showing, now there might be instances like let's say you were making a fake magazine cover and you want to have part of your image over the title of your magazine like they do sometimes, then you'd have to put your move, just like I showed you before, your text below to a lower level layer than where you want the image to be. So let's say we want it to be below this folded dollar. So we click and make sure we have our move tool active, we have this active, and we want to drag this is money to below the folded dollar. So there's the layer with the folded dollar. And see how it is then? So you can get trickier with your positioning just by where you put your layer in the layer stack. Okay. Now what else can I show you? So another thing you can do is you can undo by using Control Z. So let me see here. There we go. I just undid that last move and I'm doing Control Z again and I'm getting this back to where it was. One more Control Z and it's back up at the top of the layer stack. So Control Z is a good undo. It'll let you undo for several steps back to get back to where you were if you did something you didn't want to do. What else do I need to show you? Okay, so let me show you how to work with some adjustment layers because they're kind of fun to work with. So again, in the layers panel, right here we have the layers tab. Down at the bottom of the layers panel, there's another icon. It's this circle with a line through it. And that lets you work with different adjustment layers. See, and if it's just like the tools I told you about in part 1 of this intro, if you hover over it, it will tell you what it is. It says create a new adjustment layer. So if you single left click there, these are all the different kinds of adjustment layers that we have available. So if let's see what would be a good one to work with here. How about if we try vibrance? So if you want to work with one of these adjustment layers, I'm just mousing over, so I'm not clicking or anything. And when you get the blue to the highlight of the one you want to work with, then you left click. And now we have added a new adjustment layer. And this is how it usually comes up. There's an icon for the vibrance or for the particular adjustment layer that you're working with. And then on the same layer, and it tells you which kind of adjustment layer you're working with, so it says vibrance right there. And what it does is it always opens with a mask. And I think I described masks a little bit in part 1, but masks let you show or hide content in Photoshop. If a mask is white, you see the content that you're dealing with. If it's black, you hide the content. So right now, anything that we do on this vibrance layer will be showing because it's white. And right now this mask is active, so there's a white frame around it. If we click on this icon here, layer icon for vibrance for the adjustment layer, then that tells you that that's active because there's a white frame around that. For all the adjustment layers, it's just like the tools. So in part 1 of the video, I told you that for each of the tools in the toolbar, there's a unique options bar and options and features that you can set for each tool. Same holds for the adjustment layers. For each adjustment layer that we can launch from down here at the bottom of the layers panel, they have their own properties that show up in the properties panel. So with the vibrance adjustment layer, you can either adjust vibrance with the slider, or you can adjust saturation. So now watch the document window as I do this. So if I pull saturation to the far left, we're taking all the saturation out. If we pull it to the far left, it's made it overly saturated. Okay, And what I'll typically do, because some people tend to overdo saturation on images, so what I often will do is if I want to add more pop to my images, I will pull up the vibrance slider and give the image a little bit more personality. I like to call it more pop. And then I compensate so that the image doesn't become too saturated by slightly lowering the saturation slider so they balance, so you get the pop in a subtle, natural looking way and not in a distorted colors way. So that's how you work with adjustments. Okay, now let me maybe add another adjustment layer. So again, we go back to the layers panel, come down to the bottom to the circle with the line through it, which is the add new adjustment layer. And what can we do here? Maybe add a black and white layer. Okay. And again, you can see in the properties panel, because it's a different type of an adjustment layer, we have different properties that can be adjusted. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but what I want to show you is here's how we can use the mask. So again, like every other adjustment layer, when it opens into the layer stack, you've got a mask. Right now that mask is white, so everything on that layer is being converted to black and white, because that's what we opened up, was a black and white adjustment layer. Let's make our mask active by left clicking on it. You know it's active because it has a frame around it. I'm going to go over to my toolbar and grab the brush tool, which looks like a paintbrush right there. Okay? And then I'm going to make sure that what I'm going to do is paint on this mask with my black foreground color, because in Photoshop, black hides or conceals and white shows or reveals. So with my brush tool active, my paint color black, and I've got a soft brush, so I'll just use a soft brush. And for that brush, I have 100% opacity, so it's going to be fully opaque, and 100% flow, so it should be brushing evenly. To make your brush bigger or smaller, I talked about this a little bit in part 1, you click on the right bracket key on your keyboard to make the brush bigger, and the left bracket key to make it smaller. So let's see what happens if now painting on the mask, not over here, we start brushing with the black and see what happens. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing, and I'll make my brush bigger so it's faster, is I'm hiding that black and white effect on that layer by painting in black and revealing what was showing before. Okay. The part, and here's the mask that I created, so I'm just going to show you the mask by itself. So I painted with black on the right side of the image, and I did not paint with black on the right side, so I kept that white. So this side is hiding the black and white effect. This side is revealing the black and white effect because it's white. And that's the result. So this is how you can work with the adjustment layers, is you can use any of these effects, and then if you don't want that effect applied over your entire image, then all you have to do is make sure your mask is active and you paint with black where you want to hide the effect, and you leave it white where you want to show the effect. Now let's say you want sort of a subtle in-between here for this. You can also go to the top part of the layers panel here, and where it says opacity, you can click on that little down arrow and you can lower the opacity. So if you just want a subtle hint, then you can do that too. Okay? Want a more subtle transition between the no green and the green, okay? So it's something to play with and to try to do that. If we only, let me see if I can figure out something else to show you. Da, da, da. All right, so let me move this layer down. So we already talked about how to move a layer. So if we left click on the black and white layer and bring it and drag it down to above the folded dollar. Let me do that. Okay. Yep, and it's it's not a folder dollar, it's a folded dollar. There we go. Okay, now if we only want, and let me get rid of that just for now and add a mask. Okay, if we only want the black and white to apply to one layer, then we position our cursor between the two layers and you press the Alt or Option key until you see that little down arrow. I'm over here on the right, so I'll do it again. And where it's the little finger should be your cursor. When you get your cursor position between the two layers, press your Alt or Option key. You get that little down arrow and just left click, and then the effect only applies to the layer immediately below it. Okay, so this is the only thing now that's black and white. So I think I've showed you everything I was going to show you for this particular part 2, because I think it can get overwhelming if you see too many things at once. But just to keep in mind, again, as a recap, you can either start with a blank layer or your own image layer. You can then add content by dragging other images on top. You can add effects like saturation, and they're called adjustment layers. So you would just go to the bottom of your layers panel to that circle with the line through it, and if you're starting with your own image rather than building an image like this, then again each layer above your original layer image, which you've duplicated to be safe, you can posterize it, you can make it brighter, you can add more contrast, you can adjust the curves, so you'll get a histogram, and you can adjust the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights using the curve. You could add more exposure, you could add more vibrance, you can change the saturation. Okay, saturation. So these are all effects, and you can change the hue, which is just another word for color, and you can adjust the saturation. So you can do any of these kind of effects on top of your own image by using these different adjustment layers. The nice thing about using adjustment layers is they are not destructive to your image. So you can always delete them or turn off the visibility. If you try to use something else, do not ever, ever, ever go up to image adjustments and work. These things have the same names as the things in the adjustment layer at the bottom of the layers panel, but do not work with them. Even if you see videos or whatever that people are doing it, do not go to image adjustments and work with these. These are destructive, and once you've done something to your image, you can't go back. It's like baked into your image. So just absolutely don't work with those. If you want to use any of those kinds of effects, work with the adjustment layers, because you can undo what you've done with the adjustment layers. So I am going to stop there with the quick overview of the layers. And if anyone has any questions, I do, as I said, post content on my YouTube channel page, and so if you want to have more tutorials on how to use some of these things in more depth, then I'd highly recommend you go and look at this site. And the nice thing about it is there's videos that you can pause as you go along and then practice. And then you can try the next thing as you get more proficient at what you're doing. And I'd say don't try to bite off too much at once because Photoshop can be overwhelming, and there are always multiple ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. So I suggest that you just start slowly and just experiment. It's all trial and error with Photoshop. Even people who've been working with it for 20 years, and I've only been working with it for 10 years, have to just do trial and error. There's no magic numbers or magic effects that the first time you put it on it's going to work. That's just not how Photoshop is. So I hope this has been helpful as an overview, and look forward to seeing how your images turn out when you're working in Photoshop. Take care. Bye bye.